With that, welcome you inside this edition of Big Ten Today, presented by Rally House. Rick Pizzo, Dave Revson, Jake Butt alongside. So much build up to the Week 4 schedule inside the Big Ten. Had a couple of ranked v. ranked matchups. The first one on Friday night in Lincoln, and of course, one awaiting USC and Michigan inside the Big House.
I remember when we did that schedule release show, and this was one we talked about and I had circled for a really long time. And I look at this week almost like peeling back layers of the onion. You know, you have that outer skin, you throw that away. Then you got another layer, break through that, you throw that away. And then you have the onion. It reveals the truth of what your onion is or your team is. I think that's what kind of symbolizes this weekend for a lot of teams.
Don't get a lot of onion references when it comes to college football.
No, to keep you guys on your toes, man. We got to keep it stale in here.
Yeah. I mean, it brings a tear to the eye, literally, the way you did that.
Well done.
It is. I think we had this game scheduled and we had this game circled, but I don't think we understood exactly what the implications would be. Each one of these teams may be a little bit different than we expected, and that's what makes this one so fascinating.
Yeah.
That game is our big story, and specifically, it is the quarterback matchup. They're meeting for the first time as conference opponents, USC and Michigan, and the quarterbacks will be in the spotlight. For USC, it's Miller Moss. Go back to last year, and he has 979 passing yards in his first 3 starts. That's most for a Trojan QB this century. And they've had some above-average QBs in that stretch, I'd say. On the other side, Orji's thrown 7 career passes, 4 this year, been more of a running threat in his career. So how capable is he of airing it out?
You don't play quarterback at this level without being able to throw the ball some. So, yeah, I mean, it's to sit there and think if he plays the entire game that they're going to, run it 70 times and throw it 1 time or something like that. I don't think that's going to be the case. So, no, you definitely have to account for it because he's certainly good enough to throw it to make you pay. But, I mean, everybody wants to write the story after a couple games in the season for everyone, and that's just it's a long season, man. That's a good football team that we have a lot of respect for, and to have anything less would be a mistake on our part.
Yeah, I mean, he can throw. I mean, he didn't connect on the deep ball, but you saw that he has the strength to let it go down there. So that takes timing. That throw was all about his footwork, and people don't know, like, if you don't take the right footwork and you're hitched, then the ball gets overthrown. So for him, he knew exactly what he needed to fix, and he was out there yesterday throwing for an hour or so. Tried to tell him, like, dude, you got to rest. You still got to get to the game. So he'll be ready to go.
So, Jake, how do you handle this if you're Michigan, if you're offensive coordinator Kirk Campbell, in terms of how you throw it with Orji, how frequently you throw it, when you throw it? Like, how does all this play out here?
You go in each week with a rack of 10 plays. Like, you have your openers, and everyone knows what those openers are. And I really think, of course, Michigan's going to run the ball. They're going to have Alex Orji run the ball, be a part of that game plan. But I think you have to take a shot early in this game. They didn't connect on that play that Coach Moore was just talking about. But the reason that was so wide open is they're playing Arkansas State. Those safeties were sitting at like 7 yards towards the line of scrimmage. They were building 9-man boxes. USC is going to do the exact same thing. They're going to muddy that picture. Danton Lynn can play a 4 down front or a 5 down front. I expect this week to be a 5 down front. They are going to commit resources into the box to make it challenging on Michigan to run the ball. So even if it's not going to be your whole game plan, they got to test USC early. At least be willing to show they're willing to take those shots. And I'll just say this, another big storyline is the health of Colston Loveland, because the guys that, your tight end puts into a bind are the linebackers and the safeties. You have to have a tight end, and I think Marlon Klein can do it too, but the more the merrier. You have to have a tight end or tight ends that can give those guys something else to think about other than stopping the run.
Listen, I know Sharon Moore says it was bad footwork and that they did have that throw open and available, but Alex Orji has to show, and I think he has to show early, that he can make that throw. You don't have to go 40, 50 yards downfield, but you got to show me that you can throw a 15-yard out, that you can show something that makes this secondary scared. USC's tackling has been really good. I know it's a very small sample size. They look like a different tackling team in that game against LSU. Mm-hmm. They look more physical, and I'm with you. If I'm Dan Lynn, I go into this game and I say, first couple of series, I have 8 or 9 guys up there. Until you show me that you can beat me with a 15 or 20-yard pass, I'm not doing anything else defensively.
We were at camp. We saw Alex Orji throw the ball. That dude is a freaky athlete. Like, he overthrew that, a 50, 60-yard throw. The ball jumps out of his hands. But at this point in his career, he doesn't have a single completion greater than 5 air yards down the field. So we don't know. We quite simply do not know. but it has to happen. You're not going to beat a team like USC without some balance in your offensive attack.
This is the thing that I find odd, and you're taking it from the perspective of a defensive coordinator and kind of prove to me that you can do it. I think it's also from the other side. Hey, prove to yourself that you can do it, and I just don't understand why, if you thought there was this possibility when you're in the Arkansas State game last week and you pulled Davis Warren, I don't get why you wouldn't build some confidence in your quarterback completing some of those throws, attempting more of those throws, because I think it's both sides now. Does Alex Orji believe that he can do this in a game? I mean, this is his third year as part of Michigan's offense. Obviously, he's behind J.J. McCarthy for 2 years, but he's thrown 7 passes.
Yeah. You can't believe it at this point. You can have hope, and certainly Alex Orji, we saw in camp, he did complete some of these passes. But until you put it on tape, it is an uncertainty at some level. And that's why, again, I think it's really important that early in this game plan, they give him a chance to throw it downfield a little bit and try to scheme some of these double moves. Sometimes you set up your double moves throughout the game. I think they go to it right away because I expect USC's defense to be up at the line of scrimmage. Go to it right away. Take a shot, because subconsciously you're telling Alex Orji, we believe that you can do this whether you complete it or not.
You know, Jerry DiNardo brought up a really interesting point before the Arkansas State game. He said he was surprised that it was Davis Warren going again, because that was Sharon Moore saying, I want my offense mid-season, when we get into the heart of Big Ten play, to be able to throw it more downfield, to be able to look to those outside routes. Now we're going to a completely different looking quarterback. Be also interesting to see how his teammates respond behind Alex Orji if he doesn't start off in a really spectacular fashion.
I'll tell you one thing, because all this is dependent on USC's ability to tackle, but Michigan has to tackle as well, and they really haven't been clean to start this season.
Yep, fair point.
And there's another great stat here. We like Michigan's defensive line. They can get home. They got some dogs that hum up there, but Miller Moss is third in the FBS in average time to throw. The ball's getting out of his hand in 2.21 seconds. And what that means is that ball's out underneath. Michigan's secondary is going to have to come up and tackle. So as much as we talk, tackling is going to play a huge factor in both sides in this game.
And Michigan's defense did not look great against Texas. Now, that might very well have been the best team in the country. They're ranked number 1 right now, so a lot of people who believe they are. So I'm not sure that's an indictment of a defense. But they rode that defense last year. I mean, they won the national championship because of the defense. Yep. And now here, again, a second elite offense. And does Michigan's defense have what it takes to slow them down?
Yeah, I'm just excited because we don't have to wait until Saturday to get ranked versus ranked. We get Friday night in Lincoln. Illinois, 3-0. Nebraska, 3-0. I love what Matt Rule said before. He said, everybody told us our schedule. We had to make hay early because it was so easy. We had no ranked opponents. Well, that changed in a heartbeat, because I think the narrative on what Illinois has changed. Dylan Raiola has lived up to the hype. It's a Friday night game in Lincoln. We all know the Big Ten is better when Nebraska is a good program. They have a chance on a national stage to show they're not just good, but they're ready to take that quote-unquote year 2 step that Matt Rule has taken in his previous 2 stops.
They canceled classes on Friday, too. Like, it's good
That's
for everybody.
Traffic, Jake. That's for traffic control. Yeah.
Whatever reason you need, just get everybody behind your program and your team. And really, again, when I talk about, peeling back the layers of the onions, that's going to be this weekend, this Friday as well. A trend will be broken on Friday. On one end, Illinois is +8 in turnover margin. They've been able to take the ball away. They've been much better in terms of not giving it away offensively. But for Dylan Raiola and the Nebraska offense, they've been good at taking care of the ball this year. Certainly turned that page. Dylan Raiola right now is second in the Big Ten among quarterbacks in terms of turnover-worthy plays, which means not only is he not throwing actual interceptions, but he's not even putting the ball in a risky position. I think a big piece of that this weekend is what Nebraska's done well for their young quarterback is they've been able to run the football. They're not putting too much on his shoulders. They've also been able to play great defense. So they're saying for a young guy, hey, man, don't press. You don't need to prove anything. The wins, you can take credit for some of these wins along with the rest of the team. But for Nebraska, can they run the football, and can that trend for Dylan Raiola continue, or is that Illinois defense going to be able to find a way, as they have all year, taking the ball away?
I think the other quarterback is really interesting as well. Luke Altmaier, the turnover issues were highlighted quite a bit last year for Nebraska. Illinois, maybe a little bit less so, but it was prominent. I mean, it was a huge issue for them. He turned it over 13 times in 9 games. He's yet to turn it over this year. The one area where Brett Bielema has expressed concern with his team is up front. That offensive line hasn't quite been what he had hoped that it would be, and they're going up against a really good defensive front. So does Altmaier have the time? He had some fumble issues as well last year. Does he get hit? I think that's a huge part of this game as well.
Huge, huge. In turnovers, you have to look at what happened right before the turnover, what caused it. And Altmaier was one of the most sacked quarterbacks in college football last year, not per game, sacked in total, and he missed some time. He just got hit often throughout the schedule. And I look at Nebraska, that's been the identity of their defense. When they played Colorado, which is another great quarterback in Shedeur Sanders, they pressured him on 22 dropbacks, okay? On 19 of those 22, they sent 3 or 4 guys, meaning they're not blitzing, they're not sending the house, they're getting organic pressure with their defensive line. We know Illinois has talent outside. Pat Bryant looks great. So the good thing is for Nebraska, and the challenge is for Illinois, they can get home organically with their defensive line, which means they can play 2 high shells and help their corners outside. Can Illinois' offensive line protect Luke Altmaier? It's going to be a huge story in this game.
Multiple onions, and they are, again, organic. He's our organic fruit and vegetable guy.
It's farm country out there in Nebraska, right?
And apparently everybody, the farmers have Friday off too to get to Lincoln.
They should.
They never get a day off, my friend.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe they got to wake up a little early.
Yeah, but they'll be staying up late to watch this one. 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock local time kick on Fox.
It should be a great, great game, and it'll be a charged-up stadium, 400 straight sellout, which is just amazing. And think about this. Nebraska has not beaten a ranked team since 2016.
That's hard to believe.
It is remarkable. And the one thing I will say about Matt Rule, and he's done amazing jobs at Temple and Baylor, and those are not easy places to win. So you take this with a grain of salt. He's 2-19 against ranked teams in his career, so he has something to prove as well in this game. It's a huge game. It's a great barometer, I think, for both of these teams to see where they are. You have one thing you want to add. I can see that. Is it onion related?
Think it could be.
Okay.
It could be.
Yeah.
Think about the mentality of the winner of this game, right? Think about where Nebraska's been as a program and hosting. You're canceling class. It's going to be a sold-out crowd. It's a night game, prime time. Everyone's watching. Think about what this could mean for their program if they do win. On the flip side, for Illinois, I don't think a lot of people expected them to be ranked at this point in the season, playing as good as football as they did, and yet here they are. The mentality of this team is going to be a big storyline. Of the winner of this game will be a big storyline down the stretch of the Big Ten schedule.
No doubt. Love that
Love
game.
this matchup.
Love that we get to start our weekend with that one and devote our sole attention to that game on Friday night. It should be amazing. Back on Big Ten today, the Big Ten with 4 teams in Joel Klatt's top 10 this week. That is one more than they have in the AP poll, as unlike the voters, Joel has USC in that group. In fact, he has them as the 2nd highest ranked conference team heading into that showdown at the Big House that we were talking about. Also has Ohio State a spot higher than where they are in the AP, and has Penn State ahead of Oregon, while the voters have that duo reversed. Fox Sports lead game analyst Joel Klatt joining us now to talk a little bit more about the weekend ahead in the Big Ten. And Joel, before we look ahead, I want to look back a little bit with Oregon in that game against Oregon State. We have spent a lot of time here in the first couple of weeks kind of wringing our hands about the Ducks. They're going to Corvallis, a game I think some people feared they might lose. They won the game by 5 touchdowns. They didn't punt. They only faced 3rd down 6 times in the game. They ran it great. They didn't give up a sack. So problem solved here for Oregon? Like, what did you learn about the Ducks based on that performance?
I learned that they like to be fashionably late for the season. It's like, let's welcome Oregon to the party, everybody. My goodness, it's like, hey, we started 20 minutes ago, I thought they were as good as advertised in that win over Oregon State. And that's not an easy place to win. In fact, the home team has won in that series, I think, for the last 5 or 6 years, something along those lines. The more impressive part wasn't that they went and won the game, although I would have been fine with just that from Oregon after the way that they looked in the first 2 weeks. It was the dominance that they showed, both sides of the ball. And it's fascinating to me too. And we take a look at these teams and we start to really see in college football just how important it is to not just have a quality offensive line, but the right combination at offensive line. They switched around the guard center combination and they find it, you unlock it. It's like the old locker, at high school, and they're like bang, and then you can finally open the locker. And all of a sudden everything became easier. They ran it well. Dylan Gabriel looked sensational. He was so efficient. And this is what we all expected to see. When we were looking at this roster in the preseason, we thought that they would be great on defense. We thought they would be efficient and explosive on offense, and we finally get to see that come to fruition. We clearly did not see the best from them in their first 2 weeks, in particular the first week of the season. Maybe we'll look back in hindsight and say, hey, Boise State was just really, really good with Ashton Jeanty, and they're going to go to the playoff later in the year. But, man, that win over Oregon State, I think it put them back on that tier in the Big Ten where it's like, okay, yeah, this is a team that could potentially win the conference.
Let's get into this weekend, and it starts on Friday night. So we have two ranked matchups in the Big Ten. I don't think anyone's surprised that USC-Michigan is a ranked matchup. We'll get to that one in a moment, but I would guess there is some surprise that Illinois-Nebraska is a ranked matchup. It's going to be the 400th straight sellout at Memorial Stadium in Lincoln. It should be an amazing scene. You have two teams that feel really good about themselves. What interests you the most, and what matchup do you think kind of decides this one?
Yeah, so this is where this Dylan Raiola test is going to we're going to see if it's real. We've talked about this a lot, but just to reiterate, last year Nebraska lost 5 one-score games, and in those games they had 17 turnovers, 14 by the quarterback. Okay? Like, you can't win close games like that. So their entire issue at quarterback was, can this true freshman, Dylan Raiola, be a net positive rather than a net negative this year? Well, he's been more than that, Rev. He's been more than that. In a lot of ways, he's maybe the best player on their offense, okay? So he hasn't really turned the football over. There's been a couple, but certainly not to the extent that we saw a year ago. Meanwhile, Illinois has lived off of turnovers. I believe they've gotten 9 turnovers, and they're +8 in the turnover margin. That's a big reason why they've been so successful. A very Brett Bielema style of team where they're just going to out-fundamental you and toughness you in order to try to win the game. I just don't think that on the road on a Friday night, Illinois can bank on the fact that they're going to continue to win the turnover battle to the extent that they've won it so far this season. So for me, if Raiola stays clean as far as turnovers go, Nebraska is probably going to win this game. I like them at home, in particular on Friday nights, and I know I mentioned that off air to you. If you look through college football, regardless of conference, and you see these Friday night matchups, you generally see home teams win. Home teams have upsets. This is where you see some of those big upsets where people are storming the field, and this would not be an upset. So for me, I like Nebraska in this game.
Should be a really amazing scene there in Lincoln. They've been waiting a long time to have meaningful games at Memorial Stadium.
I mean, they are starving for it, man. They've waited 25 years for like anything, and it's like, it's here. They're going to be like, bah! It's going to be wild.
There have been lots of meaningful games at the Big House, as we know, in recent years. I think this is a really interesting game with USC. I understand they're both ranked. I was saying to Ashley Adamson, though, on our show yesterday, I think that's where the similarities end. They're both ranked. Other than that, it's so divergent right now. It just feels like USC is feeling good about themselves. They had the great win against LSU. They absolutely hammered Utah State. They found a defense. And with Michigan, you're going to a new quarterback in Alex Orji. The defense, it hasn't been talked about as much because the offense has been such a challenge, but I'm not sure the defense is quite up to the level that they thought it was going to be at. So what do you think about the Trojans going into Ann Arbor? How do you see this one?
One team has an identity, and I don't think the other team does right now. And that's strange to say, when we're sitting here, because there was no team with a stronger identity and a more secure identity over the last 3 years than Michigan. And right now they're searching. They're replacing their quarterback, and so they're going to go from Davis Warren to Alex Orji. I still think that they're searching for the right combination on the defensive side about aggressiveness versus base defense or not blitzing. Meanwhile, you look over and USC knows exactly who they are. All of a sudden, they've got a defensive structure that they very much believe in. They feel like they're physical. They tackle better in space. The offense at least I thought was going to be fine even without Caleb Williams, and that's proven out to be true, in particular with Miller Moss and what he's been able to do. And think of it this way, they haven't even really scratched the surface as far as running the football effectively or getting the ball to Zachariah Branch, who's probably their best offensive player. So there's room for growth for USC even with the hot start. This is a fascinating matchup, and I will just say the one area that I think is paramount in this game, if I'm calling this game, I think it completely hinges on whether Michigan wants to try to blitz on defense or not. And the reason is because traditionally, and I've covered both of these teams for a long time, specifically Lincoln Riley and now this Michigan style of defense, when you blitz Lincoln Riley's offense, he makes you pay. And the reason is, Reb, that he has answers. There's answers built in this system everywhere, in their pre-snap and their post-snap. And so because of that, if you manipulate your structure of defense, they have an answer to exploit that area in which you're stealing from in order to create strength somewhere else. Okay, so it's a big overarching philosophical argument. Do you want to blitz Lincoln Riley or not? Meanwhile, you've got Michigan. They're wrestling with that whether it's USC or not, because over the last 3 years, they were about middle of the pack in college football in terms of pressure rate. It was right around, I think it was like 26%, which was like 48th in the country, 50th in the country. Well, you look up now, and Wink Martindale is in the top 5 in the country in pressure rate. He wants to blitz. It's what he wants to do. Well, because of that, the philosophy of the Michigan defense is no longer what we saw from the last 3 years. So they're not making teams drive 10 plays in order to score. And because of that, they're giving up more third down conversions. They're giving up more points, and they're giving up more yards. If he decides to blitz Lincoln Riley a lot, I think USC wins this one easily. And if not, and they just play a structure of defense that forces USC to earn their way down the field, I think it's going to be a closer game.
So many weapons for USC. They are at 15 different players who have caught a pass here through 2 games. So as you say,
that's what I'm saying about answers. You know, like there's always answers.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how Wink Martindale approaches it. You're going to be in Columbus, Marshall against Ohio State for Big Noon. It doesn't figure to be an overly competitive game, although obviously you never know. Marshall, as we know, did beat Notre Dame a couple of years back. But
that's right.
That being said, what are you most interested in seeing from Ohio State, even if it isn't a competitive game?
This idea of Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, figuring out what this combination of offensive players is going to do best. Because I still think that that's ongoing, but once they figure it out, it's going to be special because the pieces are special. I'll take you back a couple of years ago. Do you remember the COVID year in 2020, Rev? And they had just come off a season in which J.K. Dobbins ran for over 2,000 yards. So they were a great run team in 2019 to go along with their ability to throw the football. And then in 2020, they had Trey Sermon and some guys, and they struggled in the first half of the year to run the football. And then they figured out that they learned their players, and they said, you know what, our guys are better from the pistol. And so they sat the tailbacks behind the quarterback, and all of a sudden the run game came alive. And if you remember that year in the Big Ten championship game against a pretty good defense, and I believe it was Northwestern, who played quality defense. They had like the law firm at linebacker, if I'm not mistaken, Fisher and all these guys. And Trey Sermon ran for like 1 billion yards. I think it was like 370 yards or something. What I'm trying to paint the picture of is that Ryan Day has always done a great job of figuring out what his players do best and leaning into that. And so this idea that he and Chip get to continue to learn what Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins and Jeremiah Smith and Will Howard, all new pieces for them. You know, like how do they mesh together with the old pieces? And I know I mentioned Travion, but Emeka and Carnell Tate and Travion. That marriage and what they're trying to figure out and kind of make the concoction, that's what I'm most interested to see.
It is frightening for opposing defensive coordinators. You talked about that Big Ten championship game. Mike Hankwitz, pretty good defensive coordinator.
I played for Mike.
Yeah, had no answers in that game.
I remember just real quick, Rev, I talked to Mike before the game, and I had played, he was the coordinator on my Colorado team. So I was like, Hank, how are we going to stop them? And he's like, Joel, I don't know. And then I saw him after the game, and I was like, hey, man, that was a rough one. And he goes, kind of what we thought. And I'm just like, Hank was the best, man.
Good man, no doubt. Joel, enjoy the game in Columbus on Saturday. We'll look forward to hearing your call with Gus and Jenny. Thanks a lot, as always.
You bet. Thank you.
When the game starts, nobody owns that trophy. Nobody has possession. Trophies are nice, but it's all about the possession. It's not so much about the trophy.
That was one that evaded us for a long time.
The Floyd of Rosedale Trophy will reside for another year in Iowa City.
And we finally got that one.
The returner waved his left hand, which is an invalid fair catch signal.
P.J. Fleck, for the first time in his career, lays ownership to Floyd of Rosedale.
The Floyd Trophy is like the most meaningful.
Look at Johnson go! Nobody's going to catch him! Touchdown, Iowa!
Myself growing up in Minnesota, that's what I watched. Every time it was on, that game is on, and we're cheering for Minnesota.
Tough, hard-nosed, Big Ten football.
Taylor on his feet! What a run!
Knowing that we don't have the trophy anymore is a big thing.
To see Floyd back at our facility is, we want to keep him there, put it that way.
We got a fun one next week under the lights. Fight for the hog.
This will be the 118th meeting between these teams, dating all the way back to 1891. Of course, last year, Minnesota snapped the 8-game Iowa win streak in controversial fashion, as Floyd does belong, for now, to the Gophers. And when I say controversial fashion, you'll remember exactly what took place. Cooper DeJean back to get the punt. You see the move with that left arm there with a little mini circle, almost like he was loosening up that left rotator cuff. Well, apparently the official said it was enough to be an invalid fair catch signal. And so this punt return, which appeared to win the game for Iowa, was called back as Minnesota holds on to win it 12-10. Rick Pizzo back with Jake Butt here as we continue on Big Ten Today. Both coaches kind of downplaying that, saying this week during their press conferences, listen, last year's game has nothing to do with this year's game. I'm pretty sure that every player who was on the field and is back on a roster this year, especially in Hawkeye black and gold, doesn't necessarily feel that way.
You have to downplay it. It is about this year, but of course you remember last year. I was part of this, I was part of the trouble with the snap play my junior year versus Michigan State. And though we said the same thing, hey, it's about us, it's about this year, I can tell you amongst the locker room that was discussed. And, Coach Harbaugh would tell us, you got to wash that bad taste out of your mouth with a win. So these guys, it is about this year, but they absolutely remember this. And for me, I went out and played one of my best games all season that year, understanding how painful that loss was. I'd expect Iowa to go out there and attempt to do the same.
What everybody expects is for there to be a lot of physicality in the trenches, for both run games to take over. This one could take about 2 hours and 35 minutes if it goes according to script. But at the end of the day, someone is probably going to have to throw at least one complete pass to win a football game. It comes down to which quarterback and which receiving core can actually make a couple of plays.
And tight ends as well, But
of course, I apologize to omit the tight end position.
That's this game. These are two of the best backs in the conference. These are two experienced offensive lines. These are two great defenses as well. Like, neither team is really built to blow the other one out. This is going to be a low-scoring, close game all the way through. So in our coach meetings preparing for the game, a rule came up, the rule of 78. So you have a 78% chance of victory if you win the explosive plays, turnover battle, and the tackling battle. That's going to decide this game. Which team? Iowa's defense has given up some explosives, but the run game has also provided some explosives. Hey, you got Max Brosmer and Darius Taylor. Can they crack through that secondary? Daniel Jackson. Can Darius Taylor crack a run? Like these little things could absolutely decide the game. And to your point, there'll be 5 plays we look back and say, the fork in the road. Hey, Cade McNamara, did you make the right decision here, or did you put it in harm's way, right? That decided the game versus Iowa State. The special teams could come into play. Iowa giving up a punt return touchdown versus Troy, right? This is a big week for the Hawkeyes to try to clean up some of those mistakes and a great opportunity for the Gophers.
Yeah, you see the numbers, obviously not great for either guy, but Cade has really struggled, had that nice second half in week one. Other than that, there have been some issues with that quarterback position. Kirk Ferentz and new offensive coordinator Tim Lester kind of were hoping that Cade was going to be the solution. Not so sure that that's been the answer so far, at least. Obviously, plenty of room to prove me wrong.
Yeah, but then what they did was start to bring in Brendan Sullivan, especially down in the red zone. And red zone scoring's been an issue. Again, that was a huge deciding factor versus Iowa State. It'll be a deciding factor once again. And, what he provides is that mobility, right? He's that dual threat. So that can help open up some creases in the run game. But you're exactly right. It's been the same exact story here for Iowa for years now. Can they get any help from the offense?
Yeah, first weekend this year with multiple Big Ten games on the schedule. Of course, that Iowa-Minnesota game is a night game. Northwestern and Washington. Interesting matchup. First ever conference game for the Huskies. Big Ten Tailgate will be there live from Seattle. A fun beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 Pacific. You can only catch it on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Good for Mike Hall and Tyvis Powell getting to go out there. I know you've been, believe it's one of the best environments, atmospheres in all of college football. But what do we make of this actual game? Washington, 16 penalties in that loss to Washington State. And the last time Northwestern played a quality opponent against Duke, they fell in 2 overtimes, and we have a new quarterback in Jack Lausch, who we saw last week against Eastern Illinois.
Yeah, and I don't really know who Jack Lausch is at this point because Eastern Illinois is certainly not a Steve Belichick-led defense, right? And for Washington, I've sat in these film sessions when you just give a game away, 16 penalties. Certainly, I think Jed Fish would like that 4th down call, speed option into the boundary. And I got to imagine, on Sunday or Monday, that was a silent film session where they just rolled through these plays saying, guys, we actually do have something here, but we can't beat ourselves. And that's going to be the story of this game once again. Washington, when they're rolling, Will Rogers looks great. Couple 300-yard games. I love Jonah Coleman, but they have to avoid beating themselves. If you're Northwestern, the defense has led the way and will have to continue leading the way. Their run defense has been stout. They've allowed some dink and dunk passes underneath. So can that continue, or can Will Rogers, one of the most experienced quarterbacks in the Big Ten, kind of break through the back end of that defense and get some downfield shots?
This one may not have the hype and the pub of Nebraska, Illinois, or Michigan, USC, but for these two teams who are not going to be favored in a lot of matchups throughout the course of the season, when you play one of these winnable games, it's a have to get it to feel good and set yourself up for the rest of the season.
Rutgers coming off a bye this week. They'll head to Blacksburg to battle Virginia Tech. Greg Schiano's team off to a great start, including the first time they've ever scored 40 or more points in each of their first 2 games. Cal Monungai has set 2 straight career highs in terms of rushing yards. Ethan Kaliak-Manis has yet to be sacked. They have been really good. It hasn't necessarily been the greatest competition. They head to Blacksburg, tough place to play. We were talking about that last week. This is not Michael Vick's Virginia Tech, but this figures to be a better challenge for sure. What are you watching here?
We're peeling back the layers of the onion.
Oh, man.
Once again, man, this is a great chance for Rutgers.
Pervade this show.
You know what travels into a big-time environment? Defense and running the football. That's what Rutgers has right now. It's impossible for me to bet against Kyle Monunga. I think he's going to play 10 years in the NFL and make a ton of money, and the offense runs through him at this point. But the good thing is regardless of the opponent, you can still look at the tape and say, what are the fundamentals? Their offensive line is one of the top 5 highest-rated offensive lines in college football right now. You mentioned the quarterback there, Ethan Kaliak-Manis, has not been sacked on the year. Yeah. So up front, they are sound and stable. That allows them to be much more balanced. They're not fully dependent on Kyle Monungai, but they can do both. That's going to need to happen this weekend. This is an opportunity for them coming off a bye to play their best game to this point in the season. And when you talk about mentality coming out of a game, think about the belief this team could have if they can go on the road into a tough environment and leave with the win.
I think coaches would tell you that this is the quote-unquote rat poison game for Rutgers, because everybody's talking right now about the Scarlet Knights, how good they are, how they have a chance to win 9 or 10 games. You can't taste it. You can't enjoy it. You can't believe any of it. You got to go to Blacksburg and find a way to win. If there's a guy who's not going to let his team taste it or get kind of sucked in by the hype, I think that guy is Greg Schiano.
There's not much. I get the opponents, but there's really nothing on tape that I'm wanting to see more from them right now. Like, and when you travel on the road too, a big way of handling that is maturity. They went on the road last year in a game I called in the Big House. That was a tough competitive game late into it. They were home versus Ohio State, so it's still big-time matchup. That was a tough competitive game. And remember, this is one of the most experienced teams. A lot of those guys are back. So they're old, they're mature, they're experienced, they got a great head coach, they got a run game, they play great defense. Maybe it is the rat poison, because I'm rattling off all the reasons why this could go well. It has to go well.
Yeah, coaches have to guard against that, no question. Similar story for Jonathan Smith in year 1 at Michigan State. Exactly what you want. You have the unbeaten start, but now you get a test. You go on the road to BC. Now, they've already shown us they can win on the road. They have a conference road win at Maryland. BC's got a good mobile quarterback in Thomas Castellanos. This is, I think, a game where Aiden Chiles simply can't make the mistakes that he has made so far. You do that on the road against a good team like BC, you're going to pay the price.
Yep, and he's kind of shown his youth, because there's 10 plays where you're like, wow, is this guy special? And then there's 10 plays where it's like, hey, man, the more you play football, you got to eliminate these mistakes, right? Continue to emphasize the positive, eliminate the negative. But I actually think this is a great game for Michigan State, because where Boston College is right now is, I think, where Jonathan Smith wants to get the Spartans. They have a clear identity. They know exactly who they want to be. They can run the ball up front. So for Michigan State, long term, I think their formula for success will kind of get back to what it was under the D'Antonio years. Play good, sound, tough defense. Have a run game to complement your pass game. They'll need it. Boston College ran for 263 yards versus Florida State, right? They can pound the rock. So the defense has to show up as well.
And Boston College really good defensively. There's been a lot of talk about BC's offense and how balanced they are. And you have Bill O'Brien, who is an offensive wizard and really, really good on that side of the ball. BC's defense is good and sound, and I think it's going to be a huge challenge for Aiden Chiles. I think we learned a lot about Aiden Chiles in this game. I'm not saying Chestnut Hill's the most hostile environment, but it's a road stadium against a really good, fundamentally sound defense. This is a big test.
Yeah. The learning curve when you're young and inexperienced is exponential. Mistakes are not a bad thing, but you can't be a repeat offender. So some of these interceptions he's thrown, you're telling him, hey, listen, it's okay to throw the ball away. Throw the ball away in this game. It's okay to take a sack rather than make an errant throw. So for him, the challenge is clearly he's talented. How good can he get? How quickly can he get there?
I'll be the happy hypothetical guy.
Yeah.
What if Michigan State goes and wins this game? Then in the first 4 games of Jonathan Smith's career, you have a conference road win at Maryland, and you have a non-conference road win at BC, and you're 4-0. What we thought about Michigan State and what we think is possible in 2024 would completely be changed by a win this weekend in Boston.
Yeah. You have major confidence, too, with a daunting schedule coming up. I want to touch on the game that you're going to be calling, Penn State against Kent State. I'm not here to dump on the opposition. I will, however, point out that Kent State is last in the nation in total offense, last in the nation in total defense. I can't speak to the special teams, but I'm guessing they don't have Adam Vinatieri and Ray Guy involved.
Not a great combo.
So even if they did, I'm not sure it'd make a huge difference. So what can you learn if you're Penn State in a game like this against a team that doesn't bring a whole lot to the table?
This entire season for Penn State is just a collection to see if they can take that step. They've won all the games they should have won in these past few years, and then they've dropped it to Ohio State and Michigan. So even though, okay, if they handle business, all good, but it's still the formula and the way they win. They got a wide receiver 1 in Harrison Wallace. I love their tight end in Tyler Warren. But right now, in order to beat those top teams, you need help. You need a third wide receiver. They got Julian Fleming and Liam Clifford. 124 snaps combined on the season, 1 catch. Okay, so if Kent State is struggling that much on defense, I think this is a great week to start planting some seeds and kind of putting some money in the bank that they'll need to draw on against tougher competition later in the year.
And they have some tougher competition coming up next week, Illinois at home. I'm interested to see whether they create some pressure up front. The fact that on defense they only have 2 sacks this year, they led the nation in that category a season ago. So again, this is one of those games, I think to your point, maybe this is just the point on the opposite side of the ball, where you look at what you haven't necessarily done as well as you'd like to, and you figure out a way to incorporate that so you build that confidence going forward.
Kent State, again, like they just haven't been able to get much going offensively. They're young across the board, like one of the youngest teams, one of the youngest offensive lines up front, only one senior offensive lineman. So if there was a game to get pressure, it's this. They've had double-digit missed tackles in their first 2 games of the year, Penn State. That's another area you're going to have to clean up. The less missed tackles you have against the better teams, of course that matters.
Yeah, one other defensive note, James Franklin did say on Wednesday, Kevin Winston, it was a, quote, long-term injury. We're hearing it could be the rest of the year. That would obviously be a big loss for Penn State. Not necessarily in this game, but certainly moving forward when you're going to defend some of the offenses you're going to say inside the Big Ten. By the way, nice Adam Vinatieri reference.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't get a lot of Jack Rabbit references here
Well,
on Big Ten
I
today.
mean, you think about the best kickers of all time. I'm just hypothetically thinking.
You also
maybe,
went way deep into the Ray Guy.
Maybe the Golden Flash.
Ray Guy would have gone Reggie Roby just because we talked a lot about.
Yeah, Big Ten,
Floyd,
Reggie Roby, great punter.
Yeah.
But Ray got in the awards.
I mean,
named
any
after
punt,
Ray Guy.
any punter reference is good.
Yeah.
Turn the focus back to football. Look at the point per game differential among the top 5 Big Ten teams this season. No surprise to see Indiana averaging 51-point margin of victory. But how about the Hoosiers? More than 42 points per game, and that includes a conference roadie to play and dominate UCLA. Get to Indiana in just a second. For Ohio State, I know Dave touched on this a little bit with Joel. Marshall should not offer much of a challenge. What do you want to see from the Buckeyes this weekend?
I mean, really, they've been nearly flawless to start the season. I think the one thing that you'd like to see specifically for their quarterback, Will Howard, is he's missed on some of those deep shots. The game I was calling a few weeks ago, you know, he's got Jeremiah Smith behind the Western Michigan defense, and he just missed it. They are so dangerous. They can score in so many ways. You just want him to connect on a little bit more of those opportunities because they got the guys to get behind the defense.
Did you see, we were talking earlier about Charles Huff, Marshall coach, and talking about trying to entice the Ohio State players with Tudor's biscuits. And
I'm not sure that NIL is going to sell in Columbus.
With Tudor's biscuits, but he did also say that it was the best team he had ever seen on film when scouting, and he included the 2001 Miami team, which had 38 NFL draft picks. So the Tudor's biscuit got all the headlines, and I'm sure those are great biscuits.
They're terrific.
Yeah, but that's some high praise, no doubt. We were talking about Indiana. Rick showed that scoring margin. It's incredible. They've got Charlotte coming up here. This is not a great Charlotte team this week. So Kurt Cignetti's team getting ready for this one. What do you think of what you've seen so far from IU and what this week could mean for them as they build towards getting into conference play in earnest after beating UCLA last week?
I keep thinking back to the phrase, like when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Like Kurt Cignetti from the start has been the exact. What did he say? He said, Google me. He said, we're coming for it all in the Big Ten Conference.
Oh, he said more than that.
Ohio State, Michigan, we're coming for it all. He said it all.
Right.
But I figured they'd be improved. I liked his energy. I just didn't think they'd look this good, this fast. And they look like a team that fully expects to win, at not just every game, but every rep when they take. That was a clean victory against UCLA on the road. So for them, I just can't see. I wouldn't want to be in the locker room if I came out sleepwalking for Kurt Cignetti. I don't see them taking any of the rat poison.
I don't see that either. I've also heard that his practices are unbelievably organized, quick pace, no time off for any player. You put all those things together, if Indiana wins this weekend, he becomes the first coach in the 140-year history of that program to start his career 4-0. That is backing up all the bravado and everything you've said in the past.
That's a significant statistical sample.
Yes.
You go back 140 years.
Yes.
That's pretty good.